Okay, the Browns lose to the Atlanta Falcons 23-20, dropping their record to 2-2. So naturally, that means the Browns should fire several coaches, potentially start over and see where we end up. So, which puts us to the second time this has happened this season. Curious to see how far we can make it into the season before we just blow up the whole thing. Frustrating loss, to say the least. To me, this is the game the offense loses because you knew what the defense was going to have to deal with. It challenged with the amount of guys they were down on the defensive line, and frankly got a better performance than I thought they would. But yeah, it's, to me, you sum up this game, you go 1 of 3 in the red zone, and saying in the red zone is a disservice to what it was, because it was 1 of 3 on possessions inside the 5.
Yeah.
Those are the ones you have to win. So with that being said, Bree, where are we and how are we feeling about this team?
Okay, so first I have to start with last week. I believe that you blamed me for jinxing Browns.
I should clarify and sort of make a point with this, I suppose, is that I have nothing to blame you for, and the Browns just lost on their own devices. So clearly, me just picking something at random to pick on didn't work and is actually not really based in reality, which is weird because we seem to be grabbing on to anything we can with a name, whether it's Kevin Stefanski in play calling or Joe Woods in defense, or, well, the other guy I'm okay with getting rid of. But yeah, this sort of, if we don't play defense well, it's Joe Woods needs to be fired. If we don't execute well on offense, it's Kevin Stefanski needs to lose play calling, which is not to say that he got every call right. There's plenty of plays we can, this past week where you sit there and went, huh? But just this notion of this immediate satisfaction demand that we have, both in terms of wanting things to go good, and then when they don't, demanding some accountability that I'm not sure people understand that they aren't owed. You're a customer, not not an owner.
Yeah. Well, first, Pete, I have a bone to pick with you, because last week you blamed me for like the jinx of everything was going well in Cleveland, and then Myles Garrett gets into a car accident after I had just tweeted that everything was great being a Cleveland fan. And I don't know if you remember this, but on our podcast, you specifically said that you were waiting for Jacoby to turn into a pumpkin. And so I was watching the game on Sunday and I was like, well, here we are. Like, Jacoby is a pumpkin.
It's true.
So I think just overall, like, the Browns record at 2-2 is pretty disappointing at this point in time, knowing that the quarterbacks and the teams that they have faced. And what's weird about this whole thing, though, is I'm disappointed at the 2-2 record. However, we could easily be 0-4 or 1-3 as easily as we could be 4-0 at this point in time. So just right now at this point in the season, it's just been really weird to evaluate this team because we haven't had consistent play from offense, defense, special teams, quarterback specifically. Like, Jacoby's had 2 good games and he split them, right? The Browns are 1-1 in Jacoby's 2 best games. And then we split the other 2. So it's just right now, I think we can see that Jacoby Brissett is probably not going to be a reason you win a game. He could obviously be a reason that you lose a game, but what I don't like right now of watching this team is that every single game has come down to, the final 2 minutes.
Well, that is the NFL product and what the NFL wants it to be. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm with
you. Not great when you are rooting for a team that has a quarterback that isn't necessarily a starting caliber quarterback. Like, I don't want the ball to necessarily be in Jacoby's hands to go win a football game. And I like Jacoby a lot. I mean, I've said this on the show. I just don't think that on Sunday he played his best. There were a lot of misses, things that he needed to execute, some head scratchers, like throwing it away on 4th down at the very beginning of the game. A lot of things that, I credited him with being really smart about. And there were some things that just didn't go in his favor. Now, I will say, QB sneak, great. Like, love me some Jacoby Brissett quarterback sneaks. Like, sign me up for that all day long. He's probably one of the best in the league behind Tom Brady in quarterback sneaks. But other than that, I will say pretty disappointing overall. And I want to get into the Kevin Stefanski stuff, but I'm going to pause there because I'm sure you have things to add to our pumpkin. And can he be Cinderella again.
They are 2-2 football team, and they are every bit of what a 2-2 football team would look like. They're wildly inconsistent. You can't get, consistent. Obviously, the defense is inconsistent in terms of like just game to game where issues are, but offensively, they were great for 2 games. Could have been great in the first game, and then they were not great in this game. They were just lack of execution, some of the play calls and stuff like that. As I wrote this week, the fact that they're 2-2 is a failure. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that ruins the season necessarily, because they're going to play 13 more games, but it just puts a lot of pressure on them to find wins in games that maybe we didn't think they'd be finding wins in. Obviously you lose the game against the Jets like that, it's just a disaster. And then if you had not lost the game against the Jets the way you had, you pulled that out, and then you lose to the Falcons, it's a little more tolerable. It doesn't mean it's good or okay the way they lost. The game was there to be had, but you could at least sort of look at it. But again, here you had the Browns beat the Panthers, a game they had to win for all the reasons that we're not going to keep talking about, but people cannot let this go. Then they turn around and blow the game against the Jets. Like, you had an opportunity to create some momentum and say, we're take us seriously. You get the game you have to win on the short week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. A big win for this team psychologically and everything else. You get 10 days off, and then you lose the Falcons. Another situation where you could create some momentum and go, we're getting better and we're getting things on the right track. That when that doesn't happen, you look the part of a 500 football team. They look the part of a mediocre football team,
average at best.
Yeah, that's where they are. It doesn't mean that there are things that are not improving, because there absolutely are. There are things where you can sit there and go, yeah, I'm really excited about this. And we'll touch on a few of them. But yeah, Jacoby Brissett, I watched after the Pittsburgh Steelers game, because of course people couldn't help themselves but go, oh, he's better than the last guy. He, you had some people, and I get why they were doing it, going, oh, if he keeps this up, we don't even need Deshaun Watson. Like, okay, but you just sort of look at his career track, and there's a reason why he's in year 7 or 8 and has played for as many teams as he has, and really hasn't found any level of consistency, because he's not a consistent quarterback. Now, having said all that, what he did wrong in the game against the Falcons is absolutely stuff that can improve and get better, because a lot of it was like just stupid. I mean, I sort of touched on this like on Twitter and sort of breaking down the photos of the 4th and 3 play. And like people have pointed out rightly, it's really tough to roll all the way to the right and sort of attack downhill and then throw across your body, even though it was like a 3-foot throw, but whatever. It's the fact that he had what was Nick Chubb and Harrison Bryant sort of open, and he threw it away. Like, I know Kevin Stefanski was like, he's trying to throw it up to Njoku because he's big and all this other stuff, but it wasn't like a throw that made a lot of sense. The thing, as much as I hate to admit, Tony Grossi pointed out, it hit like the back banner.
Right. Yes.
And you're sitting there going, it's 4th down. You got to give your guys a chance. You really didn't do that. But the stuff that like makes me just seethe is the missed screen passes, because like even live, people were like, oh, they snuffed out the screens, and they did on the one they tried to set up to Njoku. The Falcons did a great job. And then Brissett ran all the way across the field and it looked really awkward, and he got 2 yards. And there was another one they kind of got, but there were 2 that were wide open, including the last one of the game where he pump faked because he thought that guy was playing underneath, and he could have led Kareem Hunt a little bit further out and he'd been fine. They had 3 linemen in front. They had 2 receivers like up the field, and you're sitting there going, if they complete this, I think the Browns at the very least tie, but probably set themselves up to win in that scenario. And there was another one he missed in another situation. You're sitting there and he pump faked and like tried to throw it through the guy. It was weird and ended up being too short for Kareem Hunt to catch. And you're sitting there going, just get the ball out somehow and good things were going to happen. Those were the unforced errors. You sit there and go, man, like, because that's stuff that it doesn't take a world of talent for him to throw the ball, a couple yards to an awaiting running back. It's not like you're asking him to throw a deep post route between 2 defenders. It's just, this is stuff that's right there. look, I think the bottom line is the Jacoby Brissett that you got for 2 games between the Jets and the Steelers wasn't sustainable. That doesn't mean he's going to suddenly fall apart. And I wrote about this. He was completing like 74% of his passes in those 2 games. Like
right.
he was 7.7 yards per attempt when his career average is like 6.6. Some of these things were going to regress to some point, but you can still win with him doing the stuff that he can do. It's just, you can't miss those gimme plays that set you up. So, but I think that game sort of proves to be like a little bit of a reality check for what he really is versus what people wanted to romanticize him to be. And again, I get it, because he's a very likable guy and you want to root for him, but there's a reason he's making $4 million as a backup quarterback in Cleveland. And I hope he remains that way. I hope he's back next year for all the things he can do and all the value he has, but it's just a tough spot. Likewise, if we want to criticize play calling, I understand sort of philosophically how the Browns work. They tend to have this sort of Bruce Lee flow like water approach where if, they're pushing hard on one thing, in this case, Amari Cooper, they tend to go to other things like David Njoku and Donovan Peoples-Jones. I wish they would have worked harder to sort of scheme him open. Yeah. And AJ Terrell deserves a ton of credit. He played a great game and covered Amari Cooper really well, which unfortunately is sort of one of the ways to short circuit the Browns offense. Take away Amari Cooper, right. Stop the run at least a little bit, which they were doing. And it really makes that whole thing challenging. So that, between that and like the Njoku end around, which I thought was going to be a pass based on how slow it was. And some of the other stuff that you saw, throwing the ball on the 1 yard line that resulted in the penalty. And that was one of the screens he missed. That next play after the holding penalty, it was a little dump off to Kareem Hunt. There was nobody that was going to stop him from getting in the end zone. Like, there's stuff that you can criticize and be unhappy with. And Kevin Stefanski immediately owned it after the game. But yeah, game you could have won, game that plays were there. But that brings the natural question: where do you come out on the decision to go for it on 4th and 3 at the 4 yard line versus kicking the field goal on the first drive of the game?
Yeah, it's interesting how that became a big topic of conversation. I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? For a lot of people, like, as a Browns fan, it is almost expected that any points we leave off the board, whether it's a 4th down that you're not able to convert, a field goal that's missed, extra point that's missed, it always seems like that deficit comes back to bite us in the butt. So as a fan perspective, it felt like, oh, that's going to cost us. Something is going to cost us down the line. However, me personally, I'm not going to be mad at the aggressive play call. I actually would rather have a coach that's more on the aggressive side. Like, I understand why they went for it. Obviously, it didn't work out. We didn't get any points from it. So that was super disappointing. I was most disappointed at being on the 1 yard line and not being able to score a touchdown. Like, to me, like, that is way worse. The fact that we made multiple trips to the red zone, to your point, within 5 yards of being able to score a touchdown. And we, only got 3 points?
10
on the day. But for the most part, so we were unsuccessful on red zone, right? Our red zone stats were 1 for 3, correct?
Yeah, 1 for 3. The touchdown is the one. They count anything else as 0. So that's why the field goal is 0, as is the going for it. I'm fortunate to coach as an assistant for a team that is aggressive as hell on this stuff. I love it. I think it's great. I think players love it. The Browns players have said themselves they love it. Jacoby Brissett, all aboard. David Njoku, all about it. I don't think people understand what that does to players. As you know, and I listened to Bernie Kosar talk about this a little, and I get his perspective. But the bottom line is, and he even admits, like, as a player, you want to go for it because you want the game in your hands. You don't want to have to basically, it's almost like being like scolded in some ways to like pull your guys off the field and send in the kicker on it. It's like you fail. You like, that's like the coach basically saying, I'm disappointed, like a parent would in that scenario. So it's tough. I like being aggressive. I think, you criticize the play call. I have no problem with that, but it's 4-point plays. Those are often the way the games get determined. Do you get the 4 points or don't you? In the case of that, they failed.
And Pete, honestly, like obviously Atlanta had to go the entire length of the field in order to score. And to be honest, they got 3 points out of that.
Correct.
Out of That's not converting the fourth down. The bigger play, in my opinion, was the David Njoku fumble that put them in great field position to then go down and score a touchdown. Like the not getting the fourth down and not converting that, like, to me, like, wasn't that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things overall. Like that led you held the Falcons still to 3 points at that point in time.
No, and I get why it's a discussion, because you look at the deficit and you go, hey, there's 3 points.
Right.
But I agree with you. Again, 1 of 3 at the 5-yard line is why you lose this game. It's just that simple.
So many other things happened like after that to me were just way more important than that specific call and non-conversion.
And it's listen, here, part of what goes into this, and we've talked about this before in relation to Cade York, you are part of your like figuring out your game plan is determining how aggressive you feel like you need to be. The Browns, with down 3 starting defensive linemen, basically looked at this and goes, the Falcons are going to score points on us.
Right.
We have to have enough points to beat them. Like, we're not going to be able to keep up with field goals. Now, ultimately, that analysis didn't hold, as they only scored 23, which we'll get there, because that's kind of like the people who want to fire the defensive coordinator.
Right.
Don't want to acknowledge that, like, he did the job in terms of that. So your analysis is like, how good do we think they are? And that is going to determine, in part, how aggressive we want to be. So they thought, oh man, this is going to be a tough day. They're going to, be able to score a lot of points. We need to score. And they went for it. Now, it didn't work. And like you said, they go down the field and they get 3.
And Pete, not to mention, we opened the drive with going down. Like, we marched down the field 73 yards. Like, we made it look easy. And we talked about this last week. At that point in time, our offense has been one of the most efficient in the NFL. And we had right and reason to assume that we would be able to convert the fourth down, because we've been able to be pretty efficient as an offensive unit at this point in the season.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. You went down the field 4 plays, 73 yards, and you've been rolling the past couple of weeks. So like I said, I get it. You're sitting there going, we've been great. Why would, let's keep it going. I want to keep the confidence up. I want these guys to feel good. I want them to, that's part of this, is the head coach is saying, I believe in my guys. I want them to feel like I always think they can score. And that's the attitude they have. And that's why players like that. Put the game in my hands, as whether it's Nick Chubb or David Njoku or Mari Cooper. And people can say, look, it's a backup quarterback. I get it. He's a backup in name only, really, because he's been here practicing for months and months and months. He's the starter at this point, just by virtue of the situation. You knew you weren't going to have Deshaun Watson for almost 3 months of the season, plus however much camp. Like, that's sort of the thing, is you know what you have in Jacoby Brissett. That's part of the reason you do it. Now, the one thing I can say, it pushes back against that, is the Browns sort of acknowledged they had almost no information. They had no information on the Falcons red zone defense because they hadn't seen it. So you're basically going back to previous years to sort of guesstimate what they're going to do. So you could say there, well, the fact that you didn't know maybe is a reason to go ahead and kick it. Again, I like the decision. I understand the notion of get points on the board first and all this other crap. I don't think you're wrong, but literally somebody said to me, that's why you drafted Cade York. And it's like, to kick a 21-yard field goal. That's why we drafted Cade York. I get it. Like, I see it. I'm always going to err on the side of being aggressive. And it was interesting because the Monday night game had the 49ers and the Rams, and Kyle Shanahan is the head coach of the 49ers, who everybody adores. He's like super conservative, and he kicked the field goal, and it worked out because the defense just took the ball and whatever. Yeah. But in the playoffs the previous year, not only did they lose the game they lost because they were conservative, but the 2 games before that, they were wrong in kicking field goals or being ultra conservative. on 4th and 1 and should have lost those games if not for incompetence, particularly against Dallas. They literally punted multiple times on 4th and 1 rather than be aggressive. And they had Trent Williams, who's like the best offensive tackle of this generation, and they couldn't find a way to get the ball behind him and go. Like, that stuff drives me nuts. And like, people will go, I love Kyle Shanahan. In fact, I know the fact there are people who would happily dump Kevin Stefanski for Kyle Shanahan, despite the fact that Stefanski has like a 21-16 record in 3 years of a completely dysfunctional organization, or at least it was before he got here. And Kyle Shanahan is 41-44. And I've had any number of people argue, well, this, and this. My basic point is the 49ers had a bad stretch, but they were a functional organization. Like, they were in the Super Bowl in 2012. The Browns are up until this last couple of years have been defined by the word dysfunction. They drafted a 28-year-old quarterback one year, and they drafted a marketing plan in the first round another year. Like, they did not understand how to do this thing that is football. And yet people want to compare these two. It's not even close. Like, the Browns are the height of dysfunction. You have a coach who's managed to find some success here. Ride with it. But yeah, I mean, those type of things, just, I'm always going to err on the side of aggressive. There are times where you have to take the points, and I get it. But if you think they're aggressive now, wait till they actually get the kid who they want to play quarterback. It's going to be hyper aggressive. And
that's what I want to talk about for a minute, because as we've talked about since we started this podcast and the last couple of episodes, it's the, immediate satisfaction of figuring out who's to blame, firing everyone that should be, that people want to be fired because of a loss or whatever. I've heard a lot about Kevin Stefanski needs to give up play calling overall and just focus on being the CEO, head coach of the team, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've heard it all. I've heard every excuse. People know that I have been a pretty staunch supporter of Kevin Stefanski as a head coach over the last, since we hired him, pretty much. Doesn't mean that I can't criticize him. I don't agree with everything that he does. I think that he had not great calls yesterday, especially within the red zone. I can acknowledge that, but I can also acknowledge it doesn't mean that he should be fired or give up play calling at this point in time. And I want to just touch on a couple of things. So first of all, I would say that with Jacoby Brissett being the starting quarterback right now, I think Kevin Stefanski has done a great job at putting him in positions to succeed. I do not think that Jacoby has necessarily executed on all of the play calls. I think there were some screen passes that he should have made or figured out how to make. There were some misses in terms of throws, decision making. So in my opinion, Kevin Stefanski right now is part of the reason that Jacoby has probably exceeded our expectations a little bit. He has put him in an opportunistic situation to make plays that need to be made. He does a great job at scheming guys open. I mean, if you watch the tape, there are traditionally a lot of guys open in the offense that Kevin is figuring out. Secondly, I don't think this organization is going to make any type of big move at this point in time, knowing that the quarterback of the future hasn't even stepped foot on the football field in a starting role. So why would it make sense at this point in time to have Kevin Stefanski give up play calling or fire him overall, and then you bring some new person in the middle of the season? Not even in the middle of the season. We're at the beginning of the season, for God's sakes.
Correct.
To then have someone come new in and put that in the hands of someone we don't even know, when we just paid over $200 million for a guy we haven't even seen play yet. Like, people, just think about that for a minute. Like, this is a Band-Aid. What we are watching right now is a Band-Aid. I do not believe this staff is going to jump to any type of decision on making any type of coaching staff changes, even on the defensive side of the ball, until probably next year. And I don't even know if that's on the table. Like, I think 2023 is when you can maybe start asking the question, if things aren't going the way that we think that we should be going with all the pieces and parts that this team has invested in and put together, then I think it's probably a fair discussion. But right now, at this point in time, Pete, like, we should not even be talking about this. We shouldn't even be giving it any type of attention.
So there's a lot to unpack here. And first, let's talk about the whole notion of the head coach and CEO thing. If high schools can get the head coach to all of the major meetings, the NFL can figure it out. Like, This is the stuff that drives me nuts. And I'm, some of this is assumption, but I'm going to assume that during the game, Kevin Stefanski clicks over to the defense when they're on defense, and his offensive staff is sitting there toiling away going, hey, this is working. This isn't working. They're doing this. There's a guy, this guy's hurt. Let's pick on him. Like, people underestimate how much those guys are doing. And Alex Van Pelt in particular, I suspect he's calling some plays,
right?
Particularly if Kevin Stefanski's involved in some big decision on defense or special teams or just involved period. And then he clicks over and goes, what do you got for me? Let's go with this. And it's it may be a handful of Van Pelt calls that he's just relaying to the field. Those are things that happen. And like, this is part of the problem is I think people, and I've tried to explain this, Kevin Stefanski is the guy, the play caller, quote unquote, but realistically it is a team effort. There's a whole lot of guys that go into this as he's bouncing around doing other things. Now, the idea that the Browns would fire somebody, Bree, you're a hotshot coordinator and you're sitting there going, looking around going, man, I'd really like to get a great head coaching job. The Browns open up as well as other teams. They have a quarterback who has been credibly accused. And even though he has not been convicted, the NFL's judge has said, did A, B, and C that are extremely egregious. How publicly do you want to announce your interest in said job the year after he was acquired and has not played yet?
I know.
It's like, this is not an easy thing. Like, if that were to happen, no one would want to go on the record and basically everything would be backdoor. And unless they're basically being handed the job, almost no interview or some mysterious secret interview process that like no one would be privy to, because you don't want to, maybe you don't want the job at all, but even if you do want the job, you don't want to have people find out. You don't want to have people find out that you were interested in the job and then didn't get it, because now you have just poisoned yourself potentially for your own team and just your general opinion. And maybe people don't pay attention enough to that stuff, but you and I do. Like, and I think a lot of people who listen to this would pay attention to that stuff. Like, that could follow you in the way that like Mike Prefer's comments in the past have followed him. Like, these things have a tendency to follow you. So like, and I've said this, like, when the Browns sort of made this move, like a nuclear submarine, everybody had to turn their missile key. And I think there's sort of a blood oath involved in this thing that like nobody's going anywhere for the foreseeable future. Now that may be just next year. It may be longer than that, but like the amount of effort that was put into acquiring this guy, including Kevin Stefanski, specifically being the one to sit down with Quincy Avery, his quarterback's coach, and Deshaun himself and all this other stuff and saying, hey, we're going to do all this stuff, to get you interested. And I understand money obviously was a very big driving force on this. If the Browns were going to make, seriously consider a coaching change, one of the people who would be involved in said discussion would be none other than Deshaun Watson. Like, whether it's, no, I want him to stay, or if you do get rid of him, I want this guy and only this guy. And that guy may not want to deal with Deshaun. Like, it's just a mess that just cannot happen.
For sure.
People don't sort of understand that. And the Browns don't have a good reputation already on this front. Like, Kevin Stefanski is the guy who's trying to mend it.
Well, I was going to say, I think he's probably handled it the best out of all of them. So you bring up another good point of just like how he's handled this entire situation and the PR the negative PR that's come out of all of this is like the organization probably think that Kevin Stefanski is very equipped at handling all of this, because like the circus is probably not going to die down when Deshaun Watson steps on the field. Like, it's all going to come back up again. And like, God forbid, there's also like the football aspect of all of this that plays into it as well, that comes with a lot of criticism on top of all of the obviously off the field issues that has already went down. But yeah, I mean, Kevin Stefanski has already handled, in my opinion, how this whole process has played out like pretty well, that trying to then bring someone else in brand new and like having to deal with that is just, it's not going to happen.
And here's one of the guys that people will bring up. One of the names that will come up immediately will be Eric Bieniemy, the offensive
I already saw that. Yeah.
Well, here's the problem. Eric Bieniemy is in part never getting a head coaching job in the NFL ever because he's had multiple issues with women in the workplace.
Great.
To then get potentially hired by a team that traded for a quarterback who has a horrible.
Sounds like a perfect match, Pete. Women. I don't know. Maybe that'd be good.
I mean, it's just like, it's horrific. You're basically like, you're either a person who's saying, screw it, we're already here, let's get nuts, or you're sitting there going, come on, I can't possibly take this seriously. Like, this is the issue you run into, and like, you have to sort of deal with that. But anyway, so putting that aside and just how insane that is and everything involved with it, offensively, a lot of things that you sit there and go, man, you're scratching your head, but they still could have won the game. And then immediately during the game, after the game, let's fire Joe Woods, despite the fact that the Browns, without Myles Garrett, without Jadeveon Clowney, without Taven Bryan, gave up 23 points, and 7 of those, as we pointed out, were directly a response to David Njoku's fumble, which happened on their side of the field.
Yep.
The Browns defense gave up 23 points. They gave up 333 total yards. They didn't allow a point in the second or third quarter.
I was going to bring that up.
They had they caused an interception in plus territory. And by that, I mean on their side of the field, which they settled for a field goal on when Denzel Ward apparently has decided to check in. And then they forced 3 punts and all this other stuff. And they obviously held the Falcons to a number of field goals in their own right. They scored 2 touchdowns, but they had to settle for 3 field goals. Like, if I told you before the game that without Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney, Taven Bryan, and all the rest, that the Browns would only give up 23 points, I suspect you would sign up and go, okay, great, we win, because of the way the offense is played. Like, you would have said, okay, I feel great. Easy. We win the football game.
Honestly, Pete, if you were to show anyone the box score of the teams without knowing what the total score was in the game, I don't see how you could get that the Browns actually lost this football game. I mean, there's maybe 2 stat lines that jump out as, not very good. One of them was one that we talked about, red zone.
Mm-hmm.
Second one, to me, was the penalty variation between the Browns versus the Falcons. And that was that the Browns were penalized 7 times for 51 yards, Atlanta only once for 15, which, I mean, to Pete, I'm sorry, I'm not going to blame the officials for any of this. I'm just saying, like, it is absolutely frustrating, continues to be frustrating, how many penalties that halt a good Cleveland Browns drive or puts us in a really bad position on the defensive side of the ball. And that's where this team just remains frustrating for me, is just that lack of the lack of consistency, the lack of discipline. This team continues to shoot themselves in the foot time and time again. And it feels like the only way for the Browns to win this game, it's like everything has to fall exactly into place. This team right now, as they are constructed with how things have been going, cannot afford to make these types of mistakes, because they all seem to just add up. And it seems to always come back to bite us in the butt. We just aren't good enough to do this to ourselves. We're just not.
Okay. So the one penalty the Falcons had was the face mask by Drake London, which you don't often see, but was absolutely a face mask. There were some questions on certain plays where JOK seemed to be getting tackled. And in fact,
gosh, I know. And
they called the penalty on the Browns on that.
Yes, oh my God. When they went down and they literally ran the ball like 10 times in a row, and then they called a hold on the Brown. I was like, oh my, did I just witness this in real life? Did this just happen?
So I agree with you that the Browns have a very small room for error, and some of that is having Brissett, and some of that is the inconsistency on defense. But as I was reading Marla Ridenour's article talking about Kevin Stefanski, seat warming up, which sort of prompted a lot of this, 7 penalties for 51 yards isn't that much to be like going, oh, this team's undisciplined. This team, it's not, you don't like that, but it's always a question of what type of penalties you're getting. Are they penalties of aggression, like holding calls, like Wyatt Teller's holding call, which seemed questionable at least, or is it dumb stuff like, false start, illegal, motion, those type of things, and like illegal man downfield because Jacoby Brissett pumped the ball and has to get out.
It just feels like for the Browns, they always happen like at the worst times possible.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, there's no question that like there's a momentum feel of
yes.
When can this possibly be the worst time for the flag?
Yes. They are drive killers.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the other thing, not having to do with penalties, but like the last series when Jacoby was going down the field in the 2-minute drill, I mean, it was literally like deja vu with just like negative play after negative play after negative play, right? It was like, that was the illegal man downfield penalty, right? Was that
first that 3-play series was the illegal man downfield trying to go to the screen.
Yep.
And from 2nd and 10 to 2nd and 15. Then the very next play, he took a sack he just can't take.
Yep.
So now it becomes 3rd and 23. And the next play, he tries to go all the way down the field, throws a bad interception when Dearness Johnson appeared to be sitting in a spot where it wasn't going to get first down, but it was going to at least allow Cade York to take a shot from that point. So it was like those 3 plays sort of encapsulated the frustration of Jacoby's day in terms of just the things that went wrong, could go wrong, went wrong, and sort of short-circuited that potential game-winning or at least game-timing drive. Yeah, I mean, those things just drive you nuts. But like all of those things that the Browns did were unforced errors. Like, I get it. The defense has to make a play on the interception, but the taking of the sack, you can't take. Unforced error. The penalty, unforced error.
Yes. Throwing
the ball into coverage, unforced error. Like, those are the things that sort of drive you nuts. And again, another reason why I think the offense sort of bears the brunt of the blame for the defense. And you know, people will go, well, they gave up like 100 yards rushing in the fourth quarter. Yeah, I get it. I watched all of it. And people are going, well, you should fire Joe Woods for this. I watched. It was 8-man box after 8-man box after 8-man box. And the Falcons and Chris Lindstrom in particular, right guard, looked like a Hall of Famer as he's casually tossing our defensive tackles aside. It wasn't an X and O problem. It was a Jimmy and Joe problem. The Browns, Jimmys and Joes are at home or on the sideline because they're injured, and we're
playing guys that were on the cusp of making the roster as our starters, people.
Yes. I mean, you know, like the thing that made me die laughing, and I didn't realize it until like later, was when people were calling Isaac Rochelle TikTok. And maybe you will get this reference. I suddenly laughed to myself at one point because it made me think of that movie Return to Oz, the sort of shitty sequel to the Wizard of Oz, and the little clock guy that they called TikTok. Like,
wait, people were just referring to him as TikTok on Twitter. I missed that completely.
Somebody's like, we got to cut TikTok out as soon as I was just like dying. It was hysterical.
I mean, first of all, I love his wife and I love him and I love them on TikTok, and they have a career if football doesn't work out because they're great on TikTok. So
yeah, I just think he's a very nice practice squad player to have around. I don't want him on the field on fourth down or in the fourth quarter of a game where you need it to happen. And this sort of illustrates like the problem of not having your starting defensive ends. The Browns defense is built around, shockingly enough, your 2 best players
that were not on the field.
Line. Alex Wright, I love what he can be. You know, when he's wrong, it was bad. Isaac Rochelle kept going inside for reasons I couldn't explain because there were at times no help outside of him. And those defensive tackles just got exposed. They're not, one, they're playing awful. And 2, then you have all the things that are going to make them look even worse by not having your 2 best dudes out there helping to sort of minimize that stuff. And you got run over, but again, it was not a scheme issue. I think the issue people had, and they go, oh man, look at this play where Olamide Zaccheaus was wide open. Well, that was partly a product of the Browns being so determined to stop the run. They had 8 men in the box. They played cover 3 behind, and Zaccheaus was probably John Johnson's guy, but they ran a cover 3 beater, as you would, because it was cover 3 and you knew what they were going to do. That's a result of having a deficiency in talent on the front. You had to commit more guys. The Browns offense is entirely designed around this concept. People have to commit too many guys to stop Nick Chubb, and the Browns are able to pass the ball effectively because they have less guys. Like Amari Cooper doesn't get double teamed because he can't. You need a guy like AJ Terrell who's good enough to sort of stop him, to really limit him. That is the whole point. Like, people sort of don't want to acknowledge the fact that opposing coaches get paid too. Like, there's this element of it's not easy. So I get it. It's frustrating. The Browns gave up 13 points in the fourth quarter. Yeah, I think 13, or maybe it's 10. But it just came down to are in a situation where and I don't know what took the Falcons so long to figure it out, to just pound the ball over and over and over again. They got down the field pretty quick a couple times and then had to settle for field goals, which if you go back to that initial decision to go for it on 4th and 3, if they score there, get the touchdown, like those two decisions they made in the fourth quarter get a lot more complicated for them, because at some point they're going to have to decide, hey, we got to go for this. And you potentially win the game right there. But despite all of that, despite giving all that yardage on the ground, despite, even though it was only 333 total yards on the game, the defense did enough to win. The Browns offense had 16 more plays than the Falcons, which again should be enough to win. You had extra possessions. You did what you want to do. And part of their thought process was, we can hold the ball longer and protect our defense by not having them out for as many reps. Mission accomplished. It worked. You got a lot of stops, especially in the third quarter. That was the point. We talk about the red zone stuff. The third quarter is really where I thought they blew the opportunity. The Browns defense got 2 punts and then the interception, and the Browns got a field goal out of those 3 possessions. That was really tough.
Agreed.
So it's frustrating. And then you look at this and you sort of go, they're 2-2. They blew all these opportunities, and now they have to go and host the Chargers. And I get it. The Chargers are maybe not as good as we thought they would be, but they are still better. I would argue better than any of the teams they've played so far. So they're not giving that game away. Now, that's the problem. There's more pressure on the Browns to come out and win this game as a result of not getting those games. Do I feel good about it? Talk to me on Friday and see if Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett practice. But I'm still inclined to think the Chargers are the better team overall, and it's going to be tough sledding. Now, their defense is not playing well. Joey Bosa will be out. It may turn into a game that they had like last year, that 47-42 type game. We'll see, but just frustrating.
It is, Pete. But, at this point in time, I don't know, what were our expectations going into the season for these first 12 games, right? I mean, I know that everybody was playing the schedule game and trying to be just lose one of the first 4 and then go to the next one. Everyone wants to be that 6-5 record at the end of Jacoby's start. I don't know, Pete. When I play up the schedule game, I can go anywhere from losing the next 6.
Yeah, it's really easy.
Really depressing to think about, but just based on what we've seen these first 4 games and the inconsistency on all 3 fronts, I just think we need to just be a little bit more realistic in that there's a chance we could lose all of them. We may be surprised by a couple of wins that we probably shouldn't win, but I don't know, guys. It's going to be rocky, I think.
Well, I sort of look at this team as, they're 2-2 right now. I expect they're going to be about 8-9, somewhere in that area at the end of the season. That's just sort of who they are for reasons that
feels
are both within control and without. They can't have Deshaun Watson any earlier. They sort of priced that in, and that's sort of why they did certain things. They didn't really expect to contend this year, so they pulled back in terms of financial resources and doing things like signing free agent defensive tackles and veteran wide receivers and stuff. They didn't do those things. They traded for one. They signed one in Taven Bryan, but he was an unproven guy. You sort of look at this, and I know the other part of this is people are sort of going, well, the Browns are 2-2 and they're still tied for first place in the division. And granted, the Cincinnati Bengals losing to Dallas with Cooper Rush, brutal loss for them. And the Ravens have had back-to-back games where they've melted down at the end of the quarter, or the end of the fourth quarter. I would be cautious in doing that because the Bengals are not far from a stretch where they could go 6-0.
Yes.
We're part of it.
Yes.
And the Ravens are not far from a stretch where they can run off a ton of wins. The difference between who the Ravens lost to, the Dolphins and the Bills,
right, to
losing to the Jets and the Falcons is pretty significant. And both those teams are going to get their run of easy opponents in games they can easily, rack up a bunch of wins. That's why it was so important for the Browns to get out to a 3-1, 4-0 type start. So I get it. And look, I am somebody who doesn't want people to give up on the season. I just sort of encourage people to take a more realistic view and try to embrace the things that can get better and enjoy the things you can enjoy, like Jacoby Brissett when he plays well. and some of those other things. But, the part of the problem is saying that, well, we should fire Kevin Stefanski in a year where $230 million and 6 draft picks are out for 11 games. I mean, that's not realistic. The Browns themselves did not go into this thinking we're in contention. It was always about 23 to 26. Now, will they actually get there and do that? Remains to be seen. But you had to have sort of a realistic look at the season, and that doesn't change the fact that the Jets loss was an embarrassing meltdown, and the Falcons game is a missed opportunity you could have won. You're absolutely entitled, and I feel the same way, of looking at those games going, man, that's just tough.
Yeah,
but
those are ones
if they go on a bad run, I mean, you just sort of have to look at it and be honest with what they were really trying to do this year and what was realistic. We shall see. Now, they could surprise us in the same way that they lost a couple of these games they shouldn't lose. They could absolutely. The Patriots with the
you never know.
The Chargers. Who knows? Regardless of how it turns out, we will continue to be here, hopefully talking some people off the ledge. And granted, I have a lot of faith in the people who listen to us, that they're sort of in a similar mindset, but who knows? If you are one of those people, hopefully this is helping. And if you are in the camp that's sort of a similar mindset as we are, I'm not terribly surprised by that. You tend to go where what you want to hear in some respects, but also hopefully continuing to grow and add people to give them a new perspective. Regardless, we'll be back next week. Please, continue to do the things you can do, share, like, subscribe, all those things to help us out. Gives us sort of encouragement that people like what we're doing. But other than that, we'll be back, and hopefully with a better, given the pattern we're on, should be a win, but we'll see.